What's going on, football fans? We're talking about Nathaniel Hackett, who is out in Denver, third head coach to be fired. We'll talk about what else the Broncos maybe should do, who else should maybe go, and of course, our Yike of the week here on the Locked On NFL podcast.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, football fans. Welcome to Locked On NFL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day, and especially thank you to those of you who are here live to watch us talk about the Broncos instead of whatever is going on Monday Night Football right now as we record this. Leave bad football behind and instead watch Locked On NFL live on YouTube sometime Monday nights, usually. Here with Lauren Cox at Cox Sports 1. He does Locked On Bears. I'm Luke Braun. I do Locked On Vikings. And of course, the big news of the day, Nathaniel Hackett, at long last, has been fired. A lot of people saw this coming a mile away. The Broncos will now look for their head coach. He lasted 15 games or 16 weeks, 15 games. And that's not great. And Urban Meyering, if you will, although far less scandal. And here's the deal. There's a couple things. I mean, we can look at why this happened, and we should. And then we can also talk about what should they do with this Russell Wilson situation. The Broncos clearly had this focus build ready to go contend. It didn't work. Should they tear it all down? What should we talk about? But first, Lauren, give me your take on where did this go wrong? What was the Broncos' mistake here?
Well, that's the thing, right? The mistake is so layered. It's hard to just like look at Hackett in a vacuum and say, well, he was a bad coach, because like, yes, obviously there were, in-game decision-making things, a lot of the things that you try and isolate, like, okay, what is the head coach most solely responsible for, or most having the strongest individual impact and influence on? And it felt like in a lot of even those areas, Hackett wasn't hacking it.
I already did that joke on the thumbnail. You can't take it.
But so it's like surface level, yeah, you can see the like direct impacts of inept head coaching there, but you start to unravel the layers here a little bit more and more when the whole offseason and the whole plan is all about bringing in Russell Wilson and maybe getting more out of him than we saw the last season in Seattle, and getting him back to a higher level of play here, and hiring the offensive head coach coming from the LaFleur system, from the Shanahan McVay system. That's
your next McVay guy. Yeah,
exactly. Like the next hot young, offensive minded head coach candidate to come in here and have such offensive ineptitude. I mean, that's really what this boils down to. And then it becomes a chicken and the egg thing with Russell Wilson, right? It's like, how much do you blame Hackett for Russell Wilson, and how much do you blame Russell Wilson for Hackett?
Yeah, I think for me, the Hackett thing felt like a very transparent ploy to get Aaron Rodgers into Denver. We saw all those rumors over the offseason. We covered many of them on this here show on this here day of the week with me and Ross, and I think me and you sometimes. But I think the mistake there is just going for it with the assumption that if you take Hackett, Aaron Rodgers is coming too. If you listen to Peter at Locked On Packers or anybody in the Packers world talk about Hackett, his job was guy who makes Aaron Rodgers happy and not much else. And there wasn't a lot of evidence that he was going to be good at coaching. And I mean, we saw it from week one, clock management debacles, like totally losing track of how many timeouts and what the clock situation was. All the way through the season, they had problems like this. Not only that, but then add the offensive ineptitude on top of it. And I think that is why, like, I never had this opinion of Hackett that he was going to be the offensive whiz that McVay was, or that people off that McVay tree have been. Like I didn't even see a Zach Taylor in him. And when my Vikings hired Kevin O'Connell, I was like, okay, this feels like a Zach Taylor, where they just kind of took a guy off the tree and we'll see how it works. Working out great first year. Worked out great in Cincinnati too. They went to the Super Bowl last year and they looked great again this year. But it didn't feel that way. It felt like they just took a guy that like Aaron Rodgers liked, and maybe they could swing a trade through that. And then that fell through. They grab Russell Wilson and you go, all right, well, you've got Russell Wilson. We know how good he is, and it's been a disaster. I feel like Russell Wilson deserves a little bit more of a shot in Denver with a real coach who knows how to coach. And I feel pretty comfortable placing most of this blame on Nathaniel Hackett. And even if I'm wrong there, the Denver Broncos absolutely, from like a PR perspective, can get away with that. They can say, yeah, no, we got Hackett. He wasn't the right guy for the job. Let's get the right guy for the job in and see if we can't have somebody fix Russell Wilson. And they can start a whole season on that premise and like still sell tickets. So I think they can get away with that, but I don't know. What do you think? Do you think they should get rid of Russell Wilson? The dead cap is insane. They can technically get away with it June 1st, but I'm pretty sure that makes 2024 pretty infeasible. So I don't know. What do you think about where Denver stands with the Russell Wilson situation?
Yeah, I feel similarly to you that I'm not ready to just fully say Russell Wilson is washed up and there's no salvaging anything that he can do in his career. Like, certainly I think there's evidence of aging, and I think he's slowing down in some of the ways that that the quarterbacks tend to slow down, and especially I think quarterbacks of his style of play. But I also think we're still seeing him generally take care of the ball at a similar rate. He's not turning the ball over. I mean, at a per pass attempt basis, it's not overly high in terms of like PFF's turnover worthy throws and stuff. He's just not making as many of the big plays, and I think we came in with such high expectations for Russell Wilson, given how much they traded for him, and I think justifiably so. And obviously he fell short of those expectations, but just because he's not at that level doesn't mean he can't still be a winning quarterback in the NFL. Maybe not a Super Bowl winning quarterback. I mean, there's a lot of steps between here and there, but I think he's a guy that can take care of the football, can do a lot of things to help make your team successful. And now that we sort of get past the expectations, everything imploded, you're restarting from ground one. Can he be a guy that helps you win? I think he can be, again, with the right coaching staff in place and continuing to try and support him.
I think it's at least worth a try, considering just how married they are to Russell Wilson. I mean, just looking at the contract, if they were to cut Russell Wilson post June 1st, which actually takes a lot of the dead money and shoves it into the next season, they're still out over $17 million more than they would have paid if they just benched Russell Wilson but kept him on the roster. Like, it's more expensive to cut him than it is not to cut him. And they would have a $39 million dead cap hit on the books now. They wouldn't be out of the woods. They would still have, I believe, $35 million on the books next year. That's $70 million over the next 2 years. Check my math on that. I'm looking at it real fast. But it's I don't think that that's feasible. And I think if there is a world, like if you are looking at all the different outcomes and you're like looking at the fates through the like tree in Valhalla, and you're looking at all the different ways that this works out, and you see that there is any way where Russell Wilson turns out in Denver, you need to be chasing that outcome. That is the only outcome that gets anybody out of this still employed by the Denver Broncos. I'm talking about George Paton and everybody else on that front office staff. There needs to be a world where Russell Wilson works out in Denver, and you have to chase that outcome. So if you need to give up on Russell Wilson, do it in a couple of years. But in those couple of years, you might as well try to bring in a coach and see if they can't put this together while you still have guys like Courtland Sutton in the building, while you still have guys like Patrick Surtain on a rookie contract. They have talent in Denver, and I think it's worth trying to make that work, if you ask me. But there are other teams that maybe should be following in Denver's footsteps. So who else should go? We love to pour one out for teams here on the Locked On NFL podcast on Tuesdays. Ross and I love to when Ross is in. He is currently battling blizzards, so that's where he is. But yeah, we love to pour one out for teams. Let's pour one out for some coaches and see, like, who are we ready to say goodbye to after 2022. We'll get into that next.
Some of these teams are going to have to make some really difficult head coaching decisions. And it's one of my favorite parts about being able to play like, franchise mode on Madden and some of the other game systems. Yeah. But I sometimes don't feel like we get enough control over these things. And that's why I've been really spending more time than I should playing the Ultimate Football GM mobile game. It's one of our new sponsors and partners here on the Locked On Podcast Network, because it puts you in complete control over your franchise. it's really a lot of fun. It's addicting, and it's a great way to pass the time, especially if you're waiting somewhere for waiting in line for something, or a doctor's office, or waiting for an appointment or something. You can just go on your phone and manage your team. You can kind of roll through seasons pretty quickly. It gives you as much or as little as control as you want. That you can micromanage every decision if you want. You can simulate the ones that you don't want to have to deal with. But hiring and firing coaches, free agency, NFL draft, setting adjustments during the season, and working on sponsors. I mean, it's the business end and it's the football end, and it's really a lot of fun. It's challenging, it's realistic, and it's completely free and playable offline. So you can play on the go as you want and when you want to. We've got a little Locked On Podcast Network league with all of our hosts in here, trying to get our teams to get to the Super Bowl and compete and get as many wins under our belts, but easier said than done. It's something you really got to try out. It's a lot of fun. Locked On NFL listeners are going to get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game score. That's all capitals, Locked On. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com, promo code Locked On. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today.
Thanks again for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, where our NFC North cohort, Peter Bukowski, is going over all the biggest games and headlines in the wide world of sports. Let's move on and from these putrid Denver Broncos, all right? Enough talk about the Broncos, enough embarrassment on the national stage. Let's talk about other embarrassing teams that need to fire their head coaches. So we love to pour one out for those who are dead in the water. Dead teams walking, as it were. But what about some dead coaches walking? So I'll start us off. I think it is absolutely beyond time to say goodbye to Kliff Kingsbury. I'm honestly kind of surprised it hasn't happened already, just so that Arizona can get a head start on their next coaching search. They've already parted ways with Steve Keim. He took his leave of absence due to health, but then it came out that they're just going to part ways with him permanently anyways. They've had problems in their front office, and they've had scandal in the coaching staff. They've had all sorts of issues in their personnel. Injuries have played some role, but can't be really blamed for everything. That Kliff Kingsbury offense, it's figured out. It was really interesting for the first part of the season 2 years in a row with Kyler Murray. But that like option heavy kind of thing that Kliff Kingsbury does, teams have answers to it, and Kingsbury clearly doesn't have the ability to sort of morph and change as the league changes the locks, as Doug Farrar put it. I don't know. I think it's time for the Cardinals to move on from Kliff Kingsbury. Plus the feud, like very public feud with Kyler Murray, who is chained to that organization. You need to get Kyler Murray in the room, and you need to get his input on what kind of coach he wants, and you need to let that help influence the next guy. This ain't working in Arizona. It is beyond time. And it feels like because they're already getting rid of people, there's not really much use in hanging on to the head coach, unless you just want to say Steve Keim was the problem. Now everything's fixed, and I don't know, go win 5 games again next year.
Yeah, there's some minor similarities to Denver there, right? Where it's like, well, you got the quarterback has the contract that you just really can't. I mean, not that they would even want to get rid of Murray in the way that the Broncos want to get rid of Wilson, but like you are so, regardless of what the quarterback is doing, you're so married to that contract and so locked into the guaranteed money that you just gave him that it's really the coach that has to be shown the door there. If that partnership was to go to a divorce and really dissolve in that way. And Kingsbury's so interesting because like he was a guy that was not a very successful college coach in terms of wins and losses. I mean, obviously, Texas Tech, that offense was big name, and Coach Patrick Mahomes and all that. But like, we knew he wasn't exactly a college winner coming in, and comes to the NFL, and lo and behold, not exactly a major winner in the NFL too. And not that win-loss record is always the perfect reflection of exactly how good the coaches are, but it's kind of rough sledding there for him. And yeah, I mean, he's very handsome, and it's going to be hard to not see his face on Sundays anymore, but it does definitely feel like that's something that's coming.
And that smooth, luscious baritone on Hard Knocks.
Oh yeah, it's great. But something to keep in mind here with the timing of the Broncos firing, and as we think about other teams, is that the NFL changed the rules a couple of seasons ago where you can start doing head coach interviews in the final 2 weeks of the regular season.
Oh,
so
that's right.
That's why some people are saying that's why the Broncos decided to make the move now. they've sort of found that it hasn't accelerated when teams hire their head coach, but it does make things easier for scheduling, for trying to get coaches in the building to interview them and get a head start on some of that process to at least kind of, give the ownership more time to start thinking about what they're going to do there. So I'm a little surprised we haven't seen somebody like Kliff fired, but if there's no general manager in place, I don't know whose authority it is to fire a Cardinals head coach at this point, or if the owner just steps in after the season and says,
Bidwell probably,
all right, it's my turn.
It's time to just let's get rid of all of it, and that's how the Wilfs did it with Minnesota with Spielman and Zimmer. They said we're just going to clear it and let's bring in our own guys and we'll lead this charge. Another thing with Kliff too is, in the same way that I don't know if Nathaniel Hackett actually is a good coach. He just coached Aaron Rodgers, and it was kind of Aaron Rodgers was the reason Hackett was getting. And maybe it's the same thing with Kliff and Patrick Mahomes. Maybe Kliff Kingsbury just coached Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech, and then got a head coaching job with Kyler Murray, hoping you could kind of do the same thing and make him into a little mini Mahomes. And it just hasn't worked out. But Lauren, tell me, who do you think we should be sounding red flag alerts for maybe getting canned in the next couple weeks?
Yeah, it's interesting because the title of this podcast is "Who Else Should Be Fired," and I'm torn about Levy Smith because I think he's going to be fired, and I certainly don't think Levy Smith is some perfect head coach who they should really hold on to at all costs. But I also feel like kind of like Hackett, like he was thrown in one of these situations that's going to be really difficult to work with here, and just kind of given an opportunity here, and now he's just sort of the placeholder coach who's going to be fired while they go around for another head coaching cycle at some point. And obviously they're not good. They're in line for the number 1 overall pick right now. And it's not so much a defensive like Levy Smith as a great coach, but just we didn't expect anything different. I don't think he failed to meet expectations. This was expectations, was you would lose a lot. And so it feels a little unfair to him, but we knew it was unfair to him going into this head coaching job. So I don't want to say he should be fired, but he should be prepared to be fired because it definitely feels like it's coming.
Is there a functional difference between the situation presented to Levy Smith and the situation presented to Matt Eberflus? I'm asking because you do the Bears. I mean,
Yeah.
these are guys presented with JV rosters. I mean, just absolutely cannot expect a Davis Mills led team or whatever the Bears have been fielding this year to actually win games and be competitive. And obviously Eberflus has, his seat, it's ice cold. The Bears know what they're doing, and they are in a rebuild year, and there's no world at all where you would be asking this question, but it's because of the Texans and who they have been, and what happened last year and all of that, and how it kind of seems like they just want Josh McCown.
Yeah, yes. Is there a functional difference? It's stability in ownership in the front office. That's the only difference.
Yeah, there it is. Well, let's have we got a minute here. What about Josh McDaniels in Las Vegas? We know he can't be fired because of the financial situation in Las Vegas. For those who are unaware, basically because of the John Gruden contract, and because he was fired so early into it,
and lawsuit.
The Raiders have this huge kind of bloat on the books. And I'm not talking about the salary cap. I'm talking about their actual finances as a business. And to do the same thing with Josh McDaniels because of the contract he is in, the organization literally can't afford to take on another big hit like that. So they can't fire McDaniels, but should he? Or is this a first-year head coach getting his lumps out? Have the Raiders? I mean, they're still in the hunt graphics. They were just on one on Monday Night Football. So is this a bad enough season to justify that, or does he deserve maybe another chance to pull things together? Devontae Adams' second-year leap, that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because this was his second chance, right? This is not a true first-year head coach. Even Hackett, you kind of wonder, could you give him a second year? And now he's done it before a little bit and can tweak the offense. And this isn't all fresh and brand new for him trying to figure it out. Josh has been through this before, and it didn't go well the first time. And so the second time maybe it's confirmation bias, but you're kind of looking around waiting for it to go bad. And you're seeing it kind of go bad. And you're like, here we go again, right? Are we going through some of the same things? But I will say one of the big things from Denver his first time around was, losing the locker room and everything completely falling apart off the field. And I'm not tied into the Raiders organization that way, but it seems like, there's still the strong relationship between Carr and Adams. And it seems to be, as far as a 6-win team can go, it's not a complete dumpster fire of things falling apart in that locker room. There seems to be some level of unity there. And we've seen that McDaniels has been a smart offensive mind at multiple steps along his career. So I think I think there's still more reason to be patient with someone like him than Hackett, who we keep coming back to here, only because of some of the obvious reasons we already talked about for Hackett. Whereas McDaniel has some coaching bona fides from his time, obviously in New England and with under the Bill Belichick tree, but there are some real translatables there for offensive football, even if there's still questions about really like that head coach CEO role outside of Belichick's grasp.
Right. If you're trying to be Belichick, you're probably trying something stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is not quite a dumpster fire, but there are things that are dumpster fires, and those will be our yikes of the week, respectively. We each get one yike, and that's going to be next. We're going to talk about things that happened this week that make us say yike.
Sometimes what makes me say yike is some of these daily fantasy platforms, when you see the other people's lineups and then versus your own lineups, and you're like, geez, like I didn't stand a chance against what some of these other players
It's
were doing.
10,000 people, yeah.
It's 10,000 lineups, and okay, well, now I'm just a lottery ticket chance in this lineup.
Right.
But that's what I like about our friends at PrizePicks, because it's a different way to do daily fantasy sports that puts me or you or anybody playing in complete control, because you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the PrizePicks projections. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they'll score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. Not only for your favorite NFL games, but across all of pro and amateur sports, some of the obscure sports about like tennis and disc golf, cricket, and so much more. And no matter the sport, it's really easy to enter. Really just takes 60 seconds or less. Just download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with our promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Just don't forget to enter that promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100.
So, time for our yike of the week. This is something Ross and I have really enjoyed doing all season at the end of our show, just talking about something that made us say, yike. For me, my yike is going to be from the Miami Dolphins again.
Yeah.
We all saw that Tua Tagovailoa collapse at the end of the game. 3 interceptions, the game on the line, total catastrophe. And that could, in and of itself, be deserving of the yike of the week, because those were bad interceptions. If they weren't miscommunications, then it gives you serious questions about Tua's capability to play in that moment. And further adding to those questions, it was pretty easy to miss, and I certainly missed it when I was watching that game. But later it was pointed out, I saw it on Twitter, there was a play where Tua was scrambling out of the pocket. He barely got the ball away as he was getting tackled, and he hit the ground in such a way that his head really bounced off it. And with Tua being at the center of this concussion controversy earlier in the season, he's already suffered 2 this year. It makes me very worried about Tua's ability to sustain a 3rd concussion in like 2 months. That's terrible for you. I mean, that's long-term, really, really scary stuff. And not only the NFL didn't catch this. I mean, Tua played the rest of that game. And statistically, if you split the game up at that moment, suddenly Tua's stats go into the drain. And you have to wonder, was he playing concussed? Would that cause, erratic throws or timings to be crazy off or something like that? And if so, I mean, that was a clearly potentially concussive hit. Was there, we have to ask these questions of Mike McDaniel and the Miami Dolphins staff again. Did we go through the protocol here? Did the concussion spotter flag it? Did the concussion spotter miss it? If so, how can we make it so the concussion spotter doesn't keep missing these possibly concussive hits? That whole situation, to me, it just reeks. It really just stinks. And I can't get this idea out of my head that Tua, unless he's self-reported, which we know we can't really rely on players to do, even though if you're an NFL player and you're listening to this, if you have a headache, please tell the trainer. We care about you. But we can't have a system that relies on that, because we know that players are wired to not do that, to not take themselves out of a game because they have a headache, to try to tough it out. We need people looking out for these kids. And especially the younger people, the rookies and whatnot. We need people looking out for these guys. These guys put their lives on the line for our entertainment. We need to take care of them in return. It really sucks. And if that is why the Miami Dolphins are now in a precarious playoff position too, I mean, that sucks super bad for Dolphins fans. I think the Dolphins organization has a lot more questions to answer, and it's not the first time they have to answer them this year. And that is just one big yike.
Yeah, it's a big one, and like it's an important one too. Like I know we like the yike to be a little bit more like silly and lighthearted, but I think it's an important conversation, and I'm glad we're having it. So for me, that was good. If you didn't go to that one, that was where I was going to go first.
Oh, I stole yours. Sorry.
No, I was like, I earmarked that one. I was like, if he doesn't say it, I'm going to go there. But if he doesn't, I was prepared. Don't worry. For me, it's a team you and I are both familiar with. The red hot Detroit Lions go into Carolina, and you're thinking, they've won 6 out of the last 7, and they're rolling right now. Their offense is firing on all cylinders. Their defense has really been shutting teams down. Sam Darnold and the ex Matt Rule Carolina Panthers. I mean, they're kind of floundering a little bit. They've had some moments.
Speaking of one-year wonder coaches,
yeah, exactly. So, but for Foreman and Chuba Hubbard to go for combined for like 190 yards on the ground in that game, and I mean the Lions' running game completely falls apart. That defense, it just collapses in a way that was really unexpected. And Sam Darnold, low key making some nice plays out there, looking a little bit more like the Sam Darnold that we saw years ago. So big yike from the Detroit Lions, blowing it at this level. I mean, they're not out of the playoffs as a result of this loss, but you felt like, in this kind of a stretch run that they've been on, you got to win the easy ones, or at least make sure you win the expected ones, even if we don't want to call it easy, but win the ones you're supposed to win in this kind of a stretch. And what was a 5-win Panthers team at the time, which is all of a sudden finds itself in second place in their division. But that was when the Lions needed to win and needed to kind of keep their momentum rolling here. And I mean, they got the Bears this week, so I think they'll get another W coming up here. But big yikes for the Lions, really crapping the bet on that one, and getting back to more like the Lions football we were used to seeing.
It's same old Lions, right? Yeah, man, they were plucky and fun, and now all of that air has just been like taken out of it by one loss, and these Lions road woes continue. And I'm going to bring it up. Jared Goff famously needs a lot of help from his coach in identifying stuff pre-snap. They need to get to the line before 15 seconds before the mic cuts out so that Jared Goff can get information from his coach, because he's struggled with that since he was a rookie with McVay, a rookie with Jeff Fisher even. But
yike.
Yike. Yeah, that has been a famous struggle of Jared Goff's. Now, maybe that's a 4-year-old story and he's long past that, but guy struggling on the road with crowd noise, I don't know. It seems to add up that might still be a problem with the Detroit Lions. And if they are going to be the 7 seed, then they have to go on the road, and they have to figure out how to play on the road. They have to figure out how to beat the Bears, and then they'll have to beat the Packers as well. Reasonable shot that Week 18 game is a win and in if Washington loses it. You're going to have to go play at Lambeau, and then you're going to have to play at San Francisco or Minnesota, and then you're going to have to play at Philly. If you want this season to be anything, you're going to have to figure out how to play on the road. And if you want next season to be anything, you'll have to do better on the road than you did this year.
Yeah, I feel like for Lions fans, like a lot of this season at this point is probably kind of like gravy for them. Like I don't know that Lions fans were expecting to be right in the wild card playoff hunt exactly at this stage, especially once they were 1-6, right? Maybe before the season you were hopeful, but there was a stretch of that season where I think everyone was pretty resigned that it would be another bad Lions season. And so I think if I were a Lions fan, I'd be feeling like, yeah, like you want to get in the playoffs and stuff, but if you finish this season just on the outside, you're not going like, oh man, what a disappointment. We didn't meet expectations. Like to me, they're sort of already the fun team that's having fun and being the fun surprise. And if they fall a little short of that, no one's going to be coming down on them. I will just say though, the Carolina Panthers in that game had 520 yards of offense, which was even more than the Rams had in their 51-14 win over the Broncos this week. Sam Darnold and company, 520 yards of offense. I think it was number one in the league that week.
A quick yike to the Broncos. We've already talked about them firing Nathaniel Hackett over it.
The whole first segment was that yike there.
Just wow. I mean, 51 points to Baker Mayfield and the Rams. Baker, who has been there for like 3 weeks still, like absolutely no expectation that he should be shredding one of the better defenses in the league the way that game did. And I know there's a lot of defensive stuff in that game too, but
big week Big week for failed 2018 NFL draft quarterbacks, Darnold and Mayfield. Oh yeah.
Yeah, the Renaissance. It's time. Let's see what Josh Rosen just joined the Vikings practice squad. Let's see what's going on there. All right. Well, this is getting off the rails, so it's probably time to wrap things up. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day. Check out Locked On Sports today. Check out Locked On your favorite team, whichever one it is. There's a Locked On for it. We'll see y'all tomorrow with Tony and James breaking down whatever other shenanigans go on in the NFL. See y'all tomorrow.